Thank you. So turn to Matthew 5. If you do have your list of scriptures in front of you, what's on your list for today is Matthew 5:29 through 30. We did 17 through 20 last week. And in my email last night, and if you didn't get my email about 6 o'clock, shoot me an email, and that will help me just transfer you into my Monday morning group. But I mentioned I want to add a second passage for two reasons. I was thinking about heaven yesterday, and I realized this passage I didn't put on the list. And it's the passage where Jesus talks about there'll be no marrying or giving in marriage in the resurrection. So we're going to look at two passages. The first one, look at, and we're still in the Sermon on the Mount with this one, at chapter 5, verse 29. And this one we can do fairly quickly. Look at verse 29, chapter 5. Jesus says, if your right eye causes you to sin, tear it out and throw it away. For it is better that you lose one of your members than that your whole body be thrown into hell. And if your right hand causes you to sin, cut it off, throw it away. For it is better that you lose one of your members than that your whole body go into hell. Now, I suspect none of you have taken Jesus so seriously that you gouged out an eye or chopped off a hand. Couple stories about that, though. We did have an early church father named Origen in the 3rd century. Wrote prolifically. Was attached to Caesarea Maritima and the amazing Christian library that developed in Caesarea Maritima. He castrated himself. Now, we'll get to talk about that later because he didn't use this text. He used the text that is on your list where Jesus says, some people become eunuchs for the kingdom of God. And he castrated himself. Another piece of history concerning this text about self-mutilation is when we, in the English-speaking world, were being bold enough to take the Bible, which we'd had for 1,000 years in Latin, to take the Bible from Latin to the language of the people, which for us was English in England. When we were, and I had an ancestor, John Rogers, burned at the stake because he helped translate the first English Bible. The church had used Latin for 1,000 years. Latin was the translation from the Hebrew of the Old Testament, the Greek of the New Testament. Jerome translated the Latin because that was the language of the people in St. Jerome's day. He translated the Bible into Latin, and for 1,000 years that was our Bible. St. Jerome, by the way, is in our stained glass windows. We are grateful he gave us the Latin Bible because at that point, for 1,000 years, the world was speaking Latin when the world was not speaking Greek and Hebrew. But after we had the Latin Bible for 1,000 years, when some people thought, wait, why don't we just put it in the language of the people, English or French or Spanish or whatever? Highly controversial. Highly controversial. A little bit, even more controversial, but a little bit akin to the people in our culture today that think you have to use King James, because that kind of goes back further. Well, when we tried to translate from Latin to English, people like William Tyndale were killed for it. People like my ancestor, John Rogers, burned at the stake for it. It took a while before the powers of the church thought we should put the language of the Bible in your language, because you know what the church felt like, the clergy in the church. We felt like if we put the Bible in your language and you get to read it, you'll mess it all up. So there was a lot of arguing. We don't understand it now, but there was a lot of arguing and bloodshed for 100 years with people like William Tyndale. And one of the arguments that the church was saying is, you put the Bible in the language of the people, you're going to have people run around gouging out their eyes and cutting off their hands. Because, the church hierarchy didn't think real highly of you laity. I assume in the modern world, you can think, you know what hyperbole is. Jesus is using hyperbole. He's talking in exaggerated speech to make a point. I'm assuming in the modern world, you know the difference between literal and figurative. Jesus is talking figuratively here, not literally. And you just know, you probably know that just by nature. But your nature's not good, so you need to always make sure you look at Bible and make sure you know why you're doing what you're doing. Look at the context. Look at verse 29. And then look at verse 28, which you don't need a seminary degree to know that verse 28 comes before verse 29. Context is always important. In the ESV, which I have in front of me, the English Standard Version, this is just one paragraph. When we make English translations of the Bible, we can help each other out by making paragraphs out of the original language. And this is just one paragraph in the English language. Start at verse 27. It's one paragraph of chapter 5. You have heard that it was said, you shall not commit adultery. So he's talking about adultery, verse 28. But I say to you that everyone who looks at a woman with lustful intent has already committed adultery with her in his heart. Then go to your text. If your right eye causes you to sin, by the way, King James says if your right eye offends you, that's probably kind of a weird translation. Modern translations make it a little easier. If your right eye causes you to sin, so you're getting at what's going on here. If your right eye causes you to sin, tear it out and throw it away. For it is better that you lose one of your members of your body, than that your whole body be thrown into hell. And if your right hand causes you to sin, cut it off and throw it away. For it is better that you lose one of your members than that your whole body go into hell. As an aside, notice he mentions hell twice. Jesus is the one who says the most about hell in the New Testament. Not that cantankerous St. Paul. It's Jesus, meek and mild and loving Jesus, who says the most about hell. So you got hell there. So obviously the context, the specific direct context is adultery. And we know where adultery starts. And you can use this with sin in general. Where does adultery start? In your heart. You start thinking you're missing out on something. You start thinking, your needs aren't being met. You start thinking that, you only go around once in life and you're not getting all the gusto. So it starts here, which is, by the way, I still don't understand why about once a year I have to tell somebody there is emotional adultery that happens before physical adultery ever happens. So it starts in the heart. It becomes like an emotional adultery. You let someone sort of take the place of your spouse. Because if you look hard enough, you can always find somebody more fun than your spouse. That's just human nature. And, it starts in your heart, and then all of a sudden, it goes from your heart to you become like King David, and it goes to your eyes. Remember, King David, the first thing he did with Bathsheba, his house was up on the hill, hers was down on the hill, and she was bathing on her roof, which means King David could look down and see Bathsheba bathing. So it kind of goes from the heart, from the emotions, from the mind to the eyes. Then the physical stuff happens. So obviously what Jesus is saying here, and you know this, you could write this one. He's just saying, when he starts talking about gouge out your eye, cut off your hand, he's just saying there is nothing worth losing your participation in the kingdom of heaven over. Nothing. Nothing. And you need to do whatever it takes. I hope it's not gouging out your eye. Because the thing about it is, Jesus knew this. You can still commit adultery with one eye and one hand. Again, it's obvious he's talking figuratively here. It's obvious.
To that point, I've got a footnote here that says Jesus is not teaching self-mutilation, for even a blind man can lust.
That's right, even a blind man can lust. Yeah, I wish somebody could have got to St. Origen and said, get rid of the knife. That's not what Jesus is talking about. Because So we know what it is. We need, make sure that the Bible says this over and over, particularly in the book of Proverbs, guard your heart. Guard your thought life. Don't head down the path. If you have a problem with alcohol, I would suggest don't rent a room over an ABC store. I mean, just use common sense, but radically protect your heart. Don't let anything that begins in your imagination or elsewhere cost you your place in the kingdom of heaven. So we know what he's talking about here. He's just saying make sure that, because he said it already earlier, no, he'll say it later. He'll say it in chapter 6 of verse 33 of Matthew's Gospel in the Sermon on the Mount. Seek ye first the kingdom of God. Matthew tends to say the kingdom of heaven, same thing. Seek ye first, and then let everything else fall into place. Yeah, seek ye first. Don't let anything, don't let anything hinder or harm or cost you your place in the kingdom of heaven. So, don't gouge out your eye, but you might need to turn TV off or change the channel. Usually adultery involves the eyes and the hands, but sin in general, and that's why most modern translations say if your right eye causes you to sin. So just kind of, my hero, Barney Fife, used to say, nip it in the bud. Just learn how to nip it in the bud. Anyway, so that's probably enough on that one. Because I really do want to get to the thing about marriage in heaven. Because it's really about heaven. So, can't believe I left this off the list. I think you'll find this interesting. Turn to Matthew 22. Again, I'll show you the verse and then make sure you pay attention to the context of the verse. Because the verse that seems to concern people is chapter 22, verse 30. And notice in the ESV, verse 30 of chapter 22 has Jesus saying, "For in the resurrection they neither marry nor are given in marriage, but are like angels in heaven." Usually people read that and they're like, well, would I not know my spouse in heaven? Will we not have a deep relationship with our spouse in heaven? The short answer, by the way, is if your spouse is a believer in Christ, yes, you will know your spouse and you'll have a deep relationship with your spouse in heaven. Because again, context and the rest of the Bible is important. The Bible is clear in Old Testament and New Testament that we know each other in heaven. Even in the parable of Lazarus and the rich man, Lazarus was still Lazarus, and that sorry rich man was still that sorry rich man on the other side. When Jesus says stuff like when we in heaven, in the kingdom, we will sit at table with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and the patriarchs. Well, you need to know who Isaac and Jacob are. We'll know each other. We human beings are the epitome of God's creation. So there's not going to be a point in our future where we go backwards. We will become more perfectly created as God created us to be. So you won't be stupider in heaven than you are here. You will know your spouse. You will have a right relationship with your spouse. Now you don't, and I said this last week, you will not become omniscient. You will not know everything. Only God knows everything. You'll know all you need to know. Probably all you want to know in heaven. But now let's go back to the text. So what is Jesus talking about when he says, "For in the resurrection neither marry nor are given in marriage, but are like the angels in heaven"? And again, remember, the Bible does not teach anywhere, never has the Christian faith taught that when you die, you become an angel. The Bible is clear. Angels are a separate created order. They are beneath us. Go read Psalm 8. They are beneath us. They were created by God to be ministering spirits. I'm quoting the book of Hebrews in the New Testament. They serve us. They serve us. They serve God. They serve us. So angels are beneath us. But they are heavenly beings. They are heavenly beings. Now, in Hollywood, you die and become an angel. Don't build your faith on Hollywood. The Bible is very clear. Angels are a separate created order. But that's why he says you will not become angels. You become like angels. We'll be heavenly beings when the time comes. Okay, so let's keep looking at this text. Again, you need to know the context. Look at the beginning of the section, which is in verse 23 of chapter 22. Context is important. The same day, who came to Jesus? Sadducees are not Pharisees, right? Shake your head, yes. Sadducees are different from Pharisees. And you know, it's in the Bible, so you need to know this. Sadducees are different from Pharisees. Sadducees were the real conservatives in Jesus' day. They were connected with the temple. They were connected with Jerusalem. They were connected with the powers. And the Sadducees only believed that the Word of God was the first 5 books of the Bible. They're the books of Moses, Pentateuch, Torah. So they did not, we talked about this last week, with the division of the Hebrew Bible, the law and the prophets and the writings, the Sadducees only accepted the law or the Torah or the Pentateuch, the books of Moses, first 5 books. That's all they accepted. Now the Pharisees accepted the rest. And you see that when Jesus is debating a Sadducee or he's debating a Pharisee. Well, you probably know if you go to the first 5 books of Moses, you're going to have to look really hard to find anything about an afterlife. The book of Job is not in those first 5 books. The book of Psalms and the writings are not in those first 5 books. The book of Daniel, one of the last books written, the book of Daniel, chapter 12, is not in the books of Moses. Chapter 12, Daniel talks about the resurrection. So the Sadducees, the real religious conservatives, they only accept the first 5 books of the Bible. So they don't believe in resurrection at all. At all. Because you don't find them mentioned in the books of Moses. In those books, about the best you see is when it talks about somebody dying and they're gathered to their ancestors. Now, as a Christian, you read that because you've read the rest of the Bible. You think being gathered to your ancestors means going to heaven. Go talk to an Orthodox Jew. They know what Moses meant. Being gathered to your ancestors is you're getting buried out there where they're buried, is what was meant in the first 5 books of the Bible. There's a reason you don't just have 5 books. There's a reason you need to know and have and cherish all the books of the Bible. Easter is an important thing that's New Testament. Anyway, these Sadducees don't believe in an afterlife. So, and they don't like Jesus. He's an affront to their authority. So you know this from the Gospels. Whether it's the Pharisees or the Sadducees or the Herodians, they're snipping at the heels of Jesus. Yeah, Dan.
What did they think Enoch?
He walked with God and was no more. They would say, read the Bible, he was no more. Yeah, we read it. He walked with God and was no more, and we say he went to heaven. And we believe that strongly because don't mess up my sermon on Enoch. That's a Christian reading of he walked with God and was no more. So the Sadducees here, they're trying to trip up Jesus, trying to trap Jesus, trying to turn the people against Jesus, trying to make Jesus look like something other than a good Jew. So it's not accidental. They came to Jesus. That same day, Sadducees came to him who say there is no resurrection. The Bible tells you that. And they ask him a question saying, now listen, now they start off by saying teacher to Jesus. Moses said, because that's all who they reverence, if a man dies having no children, his brother must marry the widow and raise up offspring for his brother. That is in the law of Moses. We call that levirate marriage, from the Latin word levir, which means brother-in-law. And the law there that you find in the book of Moses is if your brother dies, you have to marry your brother's spouse and help that spouse, that wife, have children. That's levirate marriage. The Sadducees believe in that. Teacher, Moses said, if a man dies having no children, his brother must marry the widow and raise up offspring for his brother. That's in the Bible, in the law of Moses. Glad that ceremonial civil law is no longer in force. Again, we talked about the laws of the Hebrew Bible last week, which laws are in force in the New Testament era and which ones aren't. Anyway, that's an Old Testament ceremonial civil law. Look at verse 25. Sadducees here are really trying to trap Jesus. Now there were 7 brothers among us. The first married and died, and having no offspring, left his wife to his brother. So too the second and the third down to the 7th. I wouldn't have married this woman after a while. So too the second and third down to the 7th. After them all, the woman died. In the resurrection, therefore, of the 7, whose wife will she be? For they all had her. Now, they're trying to be absurd. They're trying to do an argument using absurdity. Because they could have made the same argument saying, only one person married his brother's wife. But they're making 7 brothers here. Married this one poor old lady that can't keep a husband. So in the resurrection, which Jesus obviously teaches, the Sadducees don't believe in, they're trying to trap him. They're trying to make him go against the law of Moses. So whose wife will she be? Notice Jesus' answer. And I'm so glad we have the rest of the Bible. It's really good, if you respect the Bible, good reasons to read it. But Jesus answered them, you are wrong, which most of the crowd would not have said that to the Sadducees. You are wrong, because you know neither the Scriptures, because they do not know the writings or the prophets. You know neither, that's only know the 5 books of Moses. You know neither the Scriptures nor the power of God. This is when he says, and I'll talk about it, for in the resurrection they neither marry nor are given in marriage, but are like the angels in heaven. And as for the resurrection of the dead, have you not read what was said to you by God? And he's quoting one of the first 5 books of Moses. Have you not read what was said to you by God in the Bible, in the part of the Bible you respect? I am the God of Abraham and Jacob and God of Isaac and the God of Jacob. He is not the God of the dead, but the living. In other words, just saying, it's in your part of the Bible that even after they die, again, we know each other, we stay who we are. Even after they die, God is the God of Isaac, God of Jacob, God of Abraham. He's not just the God of the dead Abraham, the dead Isaac, the dead Jacob. Isaac and Jacob and Abraham are still living, and God is the God of them. In other words, he's making a point for the resurrection. Now, here's the kicker that, again, when you study the Bible, I'm glad I'm not left to my own ignorance in studying the Bible. We got 2,000 years of Christian tradition. We got the church fathers who helped us out with this. So if you would have gone to Tertullian, go to Irenaeus, we actually declared Origen a heretic for other reasons, not because he just castrated himself. Don't go to Origen. But if you go to some of these other church fathers and say, what in the world is Jesus talking about? When he says, in the kingdom, in the resurrection, in the new life, in the new creation, they neither marry nor are given in marriage, but are like angels in heaven. This is where you need to think about our whole concept of the future in the new creation, the future when God's work is done, the future when God's will in heaven as is being presently done comes to earth. And it's this. Now, from a negative point of view, there's no need for marriage in the kingdom. Because, now this is what really trips up a lot of moderns, because a lot of moderns don't know what the purpose of marriage is. Or at least the primary purpose of marriage. In the Judeo-Christian biblical tradition, the primary purpose for marriage is procreation. Procreation. Now, ever since we put the marriage ceremony in English, we have 2 blessings at the end of a marriage ceremony. One of those blessings says, may God bless you with children. The other blessing assumes it's an older couple, and you don't want to make the pastor sound ridiculous. It doesn't pray that they be blessed with children. I mean, we know that. We know that. I mean, if you get married at age 90, I'm not going to pray over you that God will give you children. I might pray that you go find some children to raise and mentor and care for and share the Christian life with. But the primary purpose for marriage is procreation in the Jewish creed. Go back to Genesis. Be fruitful and multiply. Now, companionship, okay. I hope that's part of your marriage. Pleasure, okay. I hope that's part of your marriage. But the primary purpose for marriage is procreation. We know there's going to be no reason to procreate in heaven. There's going to be no hospitals in heaven either, by the way. You won't be hurting. There'll be no churches in heaven, because all of heaven, you read in the book of Revelation, is the temple, because God's presence is all in all. There are things we don't need from this world there. We don't need to procreate to people heaven. We do that on earth. So what he's simply saying is, there's no need for procreation in heaven. Now, if we keep kind of postulating this out as we think about the kingdom, again, I'm not going to be more stupid there than I am here. I'm not going to be less loving there than I am here. Because part of what heaven is not just earth on steroids. Heaven is a completely different reality. We are completed and we are perfected. We become the people we were created to be. Heaven is the finishing of sanctification. So, heaven will be the place, the kingdom will be the place where you will love perfectly. So guess what? We know this from Christians. I will love my spouse perfectly in heaven. And I'll know Tammy and I'll know her perfectly in heaven. But I'll also love the rest of you perfectly. So it's not that, here on earth, I think I'm right about this. I love my wife more than I love you folks. I protect her, I cherish her, I provide for her more than I do you folks. Now, when we're fully and completely sanctified, there's not going to be people in heaven. Now, you may want there to be people in heaven you don't like, but you'll like them when you get there. You will like them when you get there. You will love them when you get there. So again, look at the whole institution of marriage. So it's, the institution of marriage as it is needed on earth will not be needed there. There's a whole, you can write a book on why earth needs, by the way, this is a guy that's in a problem in modern culture, why earth needs the institution of marriage and family. Society needs the institution of marriage and family. Well, we won't need that in heaven, but that doesn't mean we will not love. Yeah, I won't love Tammy less. I'll just love y'all more when I'm there. Yeah, Bose.
Is it their assumption that the answer is it transcends marriage?
That's right, transcends. It is, the heavenly parts of marriage, and there are such in this world, the heavenly parts of marriage will be maintained. The earthly parts, one of my issues with the Islamic faith is their view of the next world is this world on steroids. We don't do that as Christians. The earth and heaven are 2 very different things. Earth is wonderful and great. It's going to be perfected one day. But heaven is not just earth better, earth made better. It's a completely different reality. So yeah, it transcends. It doesn't do away with any of God's perfect good work, like marriage. The heavenly parts of marriage will be maintained. But yeah, I won't need to procreate there. I've kind of given up procreation years ago. Yeah, I won't need to procreate there. We won't need to build a stronger heaven because of strong marriages and families. That's an earthly thing. But that doesn't mean the heavenly parts of marriage. Just like the rest of your life now. Just like, when you really get worship right, it's just going to get better in heaven. You get marriage right, some of that will be perfected in heaven. So Jesus, we think we know what Jesus is saying here. And you also notice he says, again, you heard me say 1,000 times when I taught undergraduates, I realized I had to teach them how to read. Look what's in front of you. For in the resurrection, they neither marry nor are given in marriage. That doesn't say they're not presently married. They will not enter into marriage in heaven, but they're like angels in heaven. They're heavenly beings. So, everything changes about us at that point. The Bible's really important. I don't know what your grandma told you about heaven, but always look at the Bible and learn about it. You need to question, hopefully, strongly, the Islamic world, parts of the Islamic world, who tells me I'm going to get all these virgins in heaven. I don't want them here or there. That's just not... But think about what Christians do. They take that beautiful word, mone, in the Greek. In my Father's house there are many mone, dwelling places. The word mone is actually the word we make into monastery. There'll be many dwelling places of deep, deep intimacy with God. Many mone. And I like King James, but it's not a perfect translation. What did they translate mone as? Mansions. God doesn't want you to be greedy or ostentatious here or in heaven. Greed, ostentatiousness, material. So just be careful. Yeah, that's why I know, you probably grew up like I did, there being many mansions in heaven. Make sure if you have to stay with that, translate the word mansion in a spiritual, supernatural way. What makes it a mansion is the intimacy with God. What makes it a mansion is peace, harmony. Mone is the Greek word, like we get monastery from. Place of peace, place of intimacy with God. Yeah. Don't think you're going to die and go to heaven and be, I can't even think of the name of a billionaire. You're not going to all of a sudden get everything he's got because you're in heaven. You don't want that stuff in heaven. So think about heaven being heavenly. You don't need a seminary degree for that one either. Let heaven be heavenly. Let the Bible teach you what the life to come means. So you're going to know your spouse. You're going to love your spouse. You and your spouse, and I'm looking forward to this. Me and my spouse, we will be sanctified. She gets on my nerves now, some. And I know I royally get on her nerves a lot. But in heaven, our relationship will be sanctified. But again, my relationship with everybody is going to be sanctified in heaven. We're going to be the people that God created us to be. So, when you read Jesus saying that, don't think, oh my goodness, I'm not going to have my spouse with me in heaven. What will keep your spouse out of heaven is lack of faith in Jesus Christ. But your relationship will be different with your spouse in heaven. Be better. Be better.
But if your spouse said there, will you remember?
Say that again.
Will you remember if your spouse doesn't make it?
I think part of sanctification, He will wipe away every tear from your eyes. I think that's going to be the wiping away of some memories. Again, I don't want to be omniscient in heaven. I don't want to know everything in heaven. I will know what I need to know for the sake of being lost in wonder, love, and praise and eternal intimacy with God. So I'm not going to wander around heaven and notice who's not there. So somehow, when I see that after the kingdom comes, and that's what you have in Revelation 21, after the kingdom comes, then God does the work of wiping away every tear from your eyes. Yeah, there's going to have to be, because again, heaven is the completion of sanctification. Some of us are going to need more work than others when we get there. But what would keep you out of heaven, obviously, core Christian faith in every branch of the Christian world, what would keep you out of heaven is faith in Christ. If you're trying to get there on your own, you won't make it. Let Him take you. Let Him take you. Let him do the work. The whole point of the Christian faith is Jesus did for us that which we cannot do for ourselves. That's why it's grace. If you're trying to do it for yourself, if you're trying to do it on your own, with your own good works, yeah, your picture's going to be right beside the word stupid in the dictionary. I mean, we humans can't do that. Yeah.
I
Yeah.
want to mention the fact that I'm going to talk about life after life on the 23rd and the 30th. But it's a different angle from what he's talking about. So y'all come. Let's talk about life after life.
Charlotta, you'll see that advertised. Charlotta will talk more about, there's been wonderful things written about what happens at the point of death. And don't know about you, but Tammy and I have had lots of opportunities to hang out with dying people. And I know they see things, they hear things as they're making that transition. And yeah, you know, just be Christian enough to realize we don't go from life to death, we go from death to life. We are in death from the moment of our birth. We start approaching death at the moment of our birth. Yeah, some people in this culture are so foolish they think they go from life to death. We go from death to life. And even in the passing, yeah, I can tell you lots of stories. My wife can tell you lots of stories. I mean, even yesterday with Joy, you know, she was long. She had for several hours been in what the medical world calls a non-responsive state. But you could watch their eyes move. And I wonder what they're seeing. I wonder what they're looking at as they're making that transition. But yeah, the Christians in this world, you know, if you go out the door here and walk down the hall toward our museum, before you even get to the museum, in the glass case on the right, there's a bunch of historic hymnals that I donated to the church going back to the 1840s. In those hymnals up to recent history, there were large chunks of hymns about heaven. When you died at age 45 and everybody died in each other's homes and you prepared the bodies of your loved ones, yeah, you thought about heaven a little more. Now we're filled with a world of Christians, or we're filled with a world of people who want to go to church but not think like Christians. Yeah, the world to come is more real than this world. You remember what C.S. Lewis calls this world. He gets it from Plato, he gets it from Christian tradition. This world's the Shadowlands. That's the real world. You just get glimpses of the heavenly here. Yeah, when Tammy and I really get it right, and our human nature doesn't kick in, we're tasting a little bit of the real world. We're tasting a little bit of heavenly marriage that will be perfected one day. Most of us, our marriage is really impacted by earth and our human nature, particularly if you're married to me. But yeah, that's all passing away.